Welcome to Science of Slink, the evidence-based poll podcast with me, your host, Dr. Rosie Boa. And just to be very clear, I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot treat or diagnose. I'm the type of doctor that does research and reads research articles. And that's part of what we're going to be doing together here in the podcast. We're going to be reading research. We're going to be synthesizing that down into things that you can apply to your poll practice. We're going to be talking with experts in their field and learning more. And overall, just really building our understanding of how bodies work, how we can do poll better, train more effectively, train more safely, and just have a better time overall. So if that sounds like something you're interested in and you want to come get a little bit nerdy with us, come on in. All right, welcome. For today's episode, I am joined by Dr. Kat Liang, who is a poll teacher and also a psychotherapist, and also has done research on dance and psychotherapy, which is at least one paper just got published pretty recently. I don't know what else you have on the horizon, but I would love for you to introduce yourself a little bit. I like to hear about folks' poll journeys, so a little bit about how you got into poll, and then maybe a little bit about your research and your work.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm a big fan of your work, so this is a bit of a fangirl moment. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm Kat. I recently got my Psy.D, so I get to call myself Dr. Kat now. Very exciting. I was actually a pole dancer before I ever thought about becoming a therapist. So this paper that was just published, that was my dissertation that I turned into a paper, has been like 11 years in the making, basically. My pole journey started in 2013. I was going through a breakup and my friend was like, we need to get you out of the house. Let's do this like pole dancing thing. It'll be fun. I think she got a group on. And it was a mixed level class. There were some first timers, and then there were some students who've been there for a while. And at the end of class, there was a freestyle dance for the returning students that I got to watch. And it was so profound. It was the first time in my life, and I was in college at the time, so I was young, but there was the first time in my life that I realized that beauty comes from within. Like, these were women in class of all shapes and sizes and colors, and they were so beautiful. And I realized that I could also be beautiful. I don't need to look like what I saw on billboards and magazines in order to be beautiful. I didn't have to change my body. And that was so profound. At that point in my life, I had survived a bunch of shit. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
Survived a bunch of shit before that moment. My body did not feel safe, both because of what happened to me individually with other individuals, but also in a broader sense, existing in the world as a woman and as a woman of color and as a queer woman of color. There were a bunch of just signals and messages that was telling me, like, I'm not right, I'm not safe. And so I need to change in order to be safe and conform. So that was really, really profound. And I was pretty much hooked from day one, taking like 3 pole dance classes every week, jumped on teacher training as soon as I could. So I became a teacher in 2015. And then when I started teaching, I started noticing that my students were coming in and something was changing for them too. Like, there was definitely body image issues and eating disorder issues that were being healed. And also anxiety and depression and self-esteem and all of this. And I had this moment of realization of like, wow, this is really powerful. And I'm not even trying to provide this healing. Like, what could I do if I went to grad school, studied this, and actually did it? So I knew what I wanted to do from the outside of grad school. From day one, I was like, I want to study dance therapy. I want to know why it works and how it works, and I want to do it. And then years later, blood, sweat, and tears, here I am. I had studied psych in undergrad, I've always been really curious about human nature. Um, so I was, even before that, I was born in China. I moved to Canada when I was 5. So and I was so young, understanding culture and how different people behave differently. So I was always drawn to psychology, um, and knowing how people work. I was also pretty good at research. I was in research jobs in undergrad, working as lab undergrad assistants. What are they called? Research assistants. There we go. And then when I graduated from college, I worked full time at the research lab for a couple of years, and I was really good at making sense out of data, making meaning out of numbers. And so it all made a lot of sense to me. I wanted to do something clinical, but I also wanted to do research. So a Psy.D was a good fit for me. Um, and yeah, I for my dissertation reviewed systematically every published research paper article that exists in the entire world on dance and movement therapy for trauma in women and girls. I wanted to go really deep on this very specific intersection. And through pretty rigorous methods, there were, at the end of it, 16 studies that were included in my review. And I got to do a little synthesis of how this intervention is being used right now and why it works. And that's the paper that was just published.
Huh. And you sent me a copy of it, which I appreciate. I got a chance to read, and I'm sure if people reached out to you, they could also get a copy, perhaps an author copy, if they were interested. Yeah, but I think it would probably be helpful for folks who maybe aren't going to read the paper. If you could pick out some of the main findings of the synthesis you did, like the specific things that you're like, these seem to be the core kernels.
Yeah. So, first of all, dancing has, before I get into the results, I want to do a little preface. Dancing has been used as a tool of healing for thousands of years. Like, this is not a new subject, but it is new that in Western medical model, people have been doing it and then writing it down and then submitting it to journals to be published. So I want to recognize that there is probably a lot out there that didn't fit into the framework of what we're talking about here, which is what Western medicine. And this whole concept of a mind-body connection, like, I was taught that since day one because my folks are from China. I pretty much grew up with traditional Chinese medicine. But this is a relatively new phenomenon in Western science we're now understanding that this is a real thing, but a lot of indigenous cultures have known this for a long time. So there's just a little caveat on that. But for the folks that have done the thing, written it down and published it, it seems like dance therapy is really variable. People are doing it 4 sessions for a month or once a week for 2 years. It spans the range of doing it individually, doing it in groups, using music, not using music. The
question at that point if it's dance.
Yes. There's some that's just movement, and we can get into like why it is helpful in terms of like imagery and metaphor, but there's some overlap in like theater therapy, I would say. So it's in the broad umbrella of expressive arts therapy. And then when we look at the outcomes that were observed for these studies, a lot of participants reported that their physical ability increased, their strength, flexibility, mobility. their emotional capacity increased, their capacity to go to some of the dark places, talking about the trauma or talking about difficult life experiences. And there was a mind-body integration. Folks reporting that, a hallmark of trauma is dissociation. Ooh, something really overwhelming has happened to the nervous system. It makes sense that the nervous system wants to shut down. You just can't take it anymore. And that's kind of what dissociation is. But because of that increased physical ability and emotional capacity, there seemed to be less dissociation. And all of that led to an increased sense of safety. People feeling more safe in their bodies, also in the therapeutic relationship. And if it was in a group, then there was safety among the participants, which then allowed them to process their trauma in a safer way, or they felt more able to process the trauma. They also reported that it was very empowering. Which is, empowerment. Not get too deep in it, because that's like a whole other talk and a whole other dissertation. But empowerment is kind of this idea that you are able to do what life needs you to do, and you have the sense that you will be successful in it, and you have a handle on things. You have a handle in whatever life throws at you. And
similar to like self-efficacy, right?
Yeah. So I felt very empowered because of the dance therapy. And then when the dance therapy was conducted in groups, there was a lot of social support that was really important. It felt really good to help others. And in turn, some participants said that helped the relationship outside of the therapy space too, that their relationships just got better kind of overall. And then the last, but definitely not least, finding was that people are having fun, and which is a really important thing. When we kind of forget about fun when we talk about, especially like something like trauma can be really like heavy and dark, but sometimes dance therapy is just fun, and we're just dancing because we like it and it feels good. And actually that has been found to help retention rates. Trauma therapy, especially when you look at traditional cognitive therapies like exposure therapy or cognitive processing therapy, a lot of folks drop out because it sucks. And we have found, not only in my study, but I've seen a couple of studies looking at yoga for trauma, yoga for PTSD, that there's one study in particular that compared the yoga to cognitive therapy. And the yoga group, fewer people dropped out from the study than the cognitive therapy group. So it seems to be like a really great, this body-based therapy is a really good fit for people who are in trauma therapy, because it's just fun. It's important to have fun.
Oh, I definitely agree. And I'm sure none of my listeners are thinking this, but I just want to be very explicit about it. These studies and these results were from working with clinical practitioners. They had, a patient-provider relationship. There was consent. This is not, as just a pole teacher, this is not something that I can or should just sort of decide to do, particularly working with traumatized populations.
I completely agree. And it's actually the biggest reason why I went to grad school is I felt the need to educate myself in something that was already happening. And I'm sure a lot of dance teacher, pole teachers can relate to this feeling of this is healing. Something is happening here that is healing. But yes, it's a slippery slope. And I have definitely seen some folks who then try to practice therapy without a license. And that can cause more harm than good.
Oh. This is just sort of similar, but I've been reading recently. Let's actually have Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness by David Trelevian. Anyway, but I was sort of interested because I came across this idea that I don't know. I think meditation and mindfulness definitely has a lot of research behind it, but particularly silent self-guided meditation for people who have PTSD or CPTSD can be very damaging and harmful.
Yes.
And I, had just come across that idea. I was like, oh, that's weird. I would have expected to have heard more about that. And so I've been reading this book to learn more about that. And especially for folks who have had, gone through some shit.
Yeah, I have personal experience with my therapy clients on this. I try to do mindfulness with everyone. I think it's so helpful. I like to define mindfulness as we are paying attention on purpose without judgment to something. And that could be your breath, that could be movement, that could be the stretch you feel in your hamstrings when you hinge at your hips and fold over. But that's what mindfulness is. We're paying attention to something on purpose without judgment. So helpful for everyone. But when I have asked my clients with pretty severe trauma to do this, to just sit there silently and pay attention to their body, it is so threatening because, again, their body was a site of violence. They are holding possibly a lot of tension because of that. And we know, as the book title says, the body keeps the score. It really, really does. I've worked with people with like chronic migraines or like unknown pain. Like there's pain here, we don't know why, but it's just there. And I can talk more about my work, but I have done like gentle movement, mindful yoga. I'm getting certified currently in trauma sensitive yoga, which is an evidence-based yoga treatment protocol for PTSD. They just did clinical trials on it. It is the first and only movement protocol that met the standard for evidence-based in Western medical industrial complex. But it's, yeah, so I do like gentle yoga and gentle movement with these folks. And after a long time, it's like, oh, the pain is going away. The pain is gone now. These migraines are gone now. Why were they there? We don't really know, but it seems to be completely like there's no biological cause for these pain. And so you ask someone who may be holding all of that in their body, just sit there and breathe and don't pay attention to their thoughts or even let their thoughts go and come, and it's just too much. It's too chaotic in their bodies. So I think that's also why something like dance or yoga, where it's a little more instructive, maybe it's a more engaging or doing something. I think meditation, when done properly, is doing something, but there can, in the very beginning, it feels like you're doing nothing. And when there's nothing, then it's all of that stuff that comes up. I hope that's making sense. I feel like I rambled a little bit.
I definitely think it is. I think the overall point is, stay in your scope of practice.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it can be even things that, have been helpful for you or have been helpful for other people aren't necessarily going to be helpful for folks who are, really struggling in terms of mental health, and a great time to, refer people to other providers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I did. I don't remember you mentioning it in the sort of like the excerpt of the paper, and I knew you did mention that the protocols of what the dance and movement therapy look like varied wildly, but I'm interested, did any of them explicitly call out free dance or freestyle dance or improvisation, or was it mostly like explicitly guided, just as a freestyler? No, freestyle. I don't know if anyone used that language, but one of the more powerful things that dance did for the participants
in all of these studies, um, I alluded to this earlier, was using movement, using the body as metaphor for their trauma processing. So, for instance, you can push away feelings of shame. And I'm literally, if you're not watching me in the video right now, I'm using my arms and I'm pushing it away. And that's not teacher or therapist guided. That those kinds of things would be participant created. Whatever, I am the participant of, and I have survived trauma, and now I'm in this dance therapy thing, and we're talking about the trauma, or we've been talking about trauma, and now it's time to do dance. And I might just like feel my body, and I just want to like push things away, and I'm pushing them. I would say that is a kind of freestyle. And as a pole dancer, pole instructor, it's not the exactly like freestyle dance as we would maybe do in the studio. But it's creative. It is led by the client, the participant, and not the teacher or the therapist.
Yeah, because and obviously I'm hypothesizing wildly here, but one of the things that, to my understanding, can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder is the type of trauma where you feel like physically restrained or held or unable to move.
Yeah.
And I am curious if
Yes.
movement practices where it feels like what you're allowed to do with your body is very rigid, whether those may be more or less helpful. And it sounds like I don't know that they're conclusive.
Yeah. I mean, what comes to mind as you're saying that is like professionally trained ballet dancers. I know a few, but you hear horror stories about how traumatizing that was for these like kids who have grown up in this culture where it's very restrictive what kind of movement they can do, and then dance becomes part of something that's really stressful for them, and it's really sad to hear. So when dance therapy was studied in these studies that I reviewed, hold on, I had a thought here. Did it leave? Yes. Okay. Let me take a step back.
Dance, ballet.
Yeah. So no, the thing you said about how trauma can result from being stuck somewhere. There was this study decades ago, back when psychologists used to use dogs to experiment on. The ethics have changed. IRB would not allow it now. But they didn't actually set out to study this, but they had dogs in crates. They were doing something else. And then there was some kind of a natural disaster, an earthquake or a tsunami or something. And some dogs were in crates, some dogs were not in crates. And I think everyone survived, but they noticed that the dogs who were stuck in crates were severely damaged from that incident. And the dogs that were roaming freely and were able to run to a secure, safe place seemed to be fine. It's like the natural disaster didn't even happen. So we can, again, they're all theories, of course, but we can kind of extrapolate from that is our animal bodies, like when the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and the brain detects danger, cortisol is running through the body, adrenaline is running through the body. It's helpful to run away or fight. That is what we have been designed to do. Unfortunately, in modern day society, a lot of our stressors happen when we're sitting down and there's nowhere to go. It happens in relationships where running away or fighting doesn't necessarily, it's not appropriate. We can't do that. And there is something about being stuck somewhere. And it's really bad if you're a child and the stress is coming from a caregiver who you depend on. Your life depends on this caregiver. So you have to actually appease them for safety. And that is what we can call now the fawn response. Fight, flight, fawn. So and so we're seeing like developmentally how damaging that can be. And there is something about releasing energy in the body that that helps, because also we know from fMRI scans of brains that when we're reminded of our trauma, the brain is reliving it. The same thing happens in the brain as when you're experiencing the trauma. So for your physical self, the biological self, there really is very little difference between experiencing a trauma and re-experiencing the memory of that trauma, which is why a lot of people find that traditional talk therapy doesn't help them as much as maybe they think they would, or maybe they hope it would, because talk therapy requires you to talk about things. It's cognitive. You need to use your prefrontal cortex. And that is just really hard when we're talking about trauma. We're reliving it in the body. It's almost impossible to engage in talk therapy.
Which is where dance and movement therapy comes out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not like they're not talking either. Like I do a lot of movement therapy with my clients, and we do talk. I think a lot of my clients, it's very ideal to meet once a week for talk therapy and once a week for movement therapy, or split that time another way. But yeah, talking is the trauma processing using language is helpful and sometimes necessary, sometimes not necessary. But yes, if we're only talking, we're not working with the body at all, it can be really difficult to engage in trauma therapy.
I'm obviously do not give any details and don't share any more information than you would like to or can. But have you ever considered, or would you ever use pole as part of your therapeutic practice?
Absolutely. I have not yet, but I so want to. And this is mostly because I'm just beginning in my career. My dream for after I'm licensed would be to incorporate pole. But I think pole dancing can be really intimidating. I think less so now, maybe it's a little more mainstream, but for a lot of my clients, the explicit sensuality or sexuality of pole dancing can be really frightening, especially if this is a survivor of sexual violence. So we start really small. We start with maybe chair yoga, and maybe we can move to the mat, and then maybe we can do dance more expressively. And then if you're interested, let's do some pole. Let's do some of that like more sensual movement. Because in my experience, my personal experience, having pole as the framework for me to explore my sensuality, sexuality, my relationship with my body, and all of that was so helpful. And I would not have had the healing that I did without it. Even if I had just did dance, I actually take some classes these days, heels choreo, where it's like pretty sexy and you're feeling yourself, no pole needed. There is something about that. It's very empowering. It's like, my body is mine, and I can do with it as I please. Pole offers a really unique opportunity to experience that, the empowerment and ownership. But so far, the movement therapy I've done with my clients has just been kind of yoga based, mindful movement based, some expressive movement. And I kind of see pole as like graduating, and that's like a tier on top.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I mean, pole also has, not necessarily, but I think a lot of It is possible to do pole without building strength, but I think a lot of the things that people are interested in doing in pole also end up being strength training, which, again, mentioning self-efficacy and building that like sense of being able to do things and affect change and change your body in a way that, you know, makes you feel more in control of yourself. I can see being sort of a natural progression in that step, although, of course, well outside my scope of practice.
No, it's so interesting when I tell people I'm a pole dancer or pole dance teacher, the number one response I get is, "Oh, that's so cool. Oh, I don't have the strength to do that. I could never do that." And it's so interesting that that's where people go because like, we don't start at the advanced, like we start at the beginner. Like it's interesting. I don't know, tennis players ever get that, like, oh, I don't have the court. I don't know. It's really, I don't know how I feel about it. I just want to shake everyone's shoulders and be like, you will become strong though.
Yeah. I mean, so if you're not a pole dancer and you've never been to a pole class, I think probably your only interaction with pole dance is in movies, right? Like you've seen P-Valley or what was the Jennifer
Hustlers?
Lopez one? Hustlers, yeah. So you've seen that, or you've seen like fail videos online, my least favorite genre of things, or you've seen, you know, maybe like some of the famous pole gifs. I mean, you started around the same time as I did. You probably saw those Janine Butterfly gifs, and you're like, oh yeah, that's what pole is.
Yeah.
You know,
oh yeah, people ask me, oh, can you do the human flag? I'm like, no, I cannot. But that's what they think of. They think pole dancing, they think Iron X.
No. Yeah, whereas like, I think, just for the tennis example, I think people have seen people, you know, hitting around a tennis ball in the park kind of having fun but not being great at it. If you had only ever seen Wimbledon, maybe you would find tennis a lot more more scary.
Yeah, you may have done a tennis class in PE, so maybe we need to do pole dancing in PE.
Maybe. I think it would be a bit of a hard sell, but who knows? I know it's the middle of your workday because you're on the other side of the US, but I do want to make sure that we wrap up on time. If folks wanted to learn more about what you do, wanted to, keep up with you on the internet, you know, maybe if you ever do pole as therapy, where would be some good places to learn more?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Kat Liang. That's spelled DrCatLiang. I am pretty new to the space, so we're growing, we're expanding, we're learning how to make reels, which is not something they teach you in grad school, by the way. It is a brave new world out here, and now TikTok is being banned. I don't know what's happening with social media, but things are changing. I am keeping up with those changes. I teach right now in Los Angeles. I teach at a studio in Culver City called POL, P-O-L. It stands for Practice of Love. Really sweet. And you know, I'm available for pole dance therapy. It's something that has been like, I would love to if someone wants to hit me up for that, because you know, we can just like reserve some studio space somewhere and you know, do some things. So it's just I guess it's such a niche that maybe if folks knew about it, that it is available. But yeah, I'm around. Hopefully I'll be doing more research. So like I said, I'm going to be certified in trauma sensitive yoga. And that is actually out of the Justice Resource Institute, JRI, in Boston. Bessel Vanderkolk's in that crew, Dave Emerson, he created the protocol, trauma sensitive yoga, and they do a lot of research. So my hope is get the certification, be involved, do more research. And again, my dream would be to write my own protocol, like a dance therapy, like a manual or something, so that I can do research on it. One of the things about dance therapy that's hard to to research is that it is so variable. The creativity, fluidity, flexibility is necessary for this intervention. But I think there's a way to build in the creativity and flexibility with also a framework then that's more easily studyable. Like the reason why CBT is the gold standard for therapy is that it's a little easier to research. It's more clear cut on what you're studying there. It's one of the reasons anyway. So yeah, I would, that's in my future. I would love to come up with something. And if I can retire as a psychologist in many, many years from now, with dance therapy being something that is reimbursed by insurance, that means I've done it.
I think a lot of people listening would be delighted if that were the case. Absolutely.
Thank you. That's so sweet.
Follow you on Instagram, keep an eye out for more research, maybe set up like a Google Scholar notification for your name, just so you know if it comes up. I think that sounds like great ambitions that I would love to see come to fruition, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye on.
Thanks, Rosie.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kat. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I will talk with you all again very soon. Okay. You don't have to hang up. I'm going to end the call.